Skylar Lyralen Kaye is a non-binary, gender-fluid writer, actor, and solo performer whose work centers truth-telling around intimacy, queerness, and mental health through bold, darkly funny storytelling. An award-winning screenwriter, playwright, novelist, poet, and filmmaker. I'll leave something for the rest of us. With an MFA in theatre from Sarah Lawrence College, Skylar is a long-time acting coach and social justice-oriented artist. He uses embodied, autobiographical narratives to explore love, trauma, and chosen family. Most recently, in famed memoir Bachelor X, about leaving a 35-year sexless marriage in their 60s to dive into queer online dating and multiplicity. Wow, you've been very busy. So I've given a brief biography, and it's been very, very nice to talk to you already before hitting record. But how would you describe who you are as a person on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, of course, I'm a mix, right? Because I have a plural identity. So I'm quite solitary. I really love time by myself. So, a part of every day is meditating, doing yoga, hiking, or paddleboarding, which is my favorite. That's my first pick. And that's very rich for me, and it's very joyful. So a part of my life is really making myself happy every day. And then, like tonight, I'm going to go to Storytelling Ericeira, and they've asked me to tell a story, so I'll tell a story. It's a storytelling event. So at this point at time in my life, that's where the acting and very public part of my life is happening. Yet at different other points, I ran a theater company, or I was running a film set, or I was teaching at a college. So I've done, a lot of different things in the public area, but that day-to-day life is, very much about relating to myself, and I have a couple extremely close people that I talk to almost every day, and that's the other fun thing.
I mean, you were saying just before we hit record that you recently moved to Portugal from the US, and it's a very big question and probably slightly unfair, but what have you found are the biggest differences in terms of culture and approach and how you feel about the location you're in? What have you found are the biggest differences, or the most noticeable perhaps, between Portugal and the US?
I think even before like the current time that we're in, I wouldn't, it took me a long time to put it this way. The United States is a very violent country. And living in the United States day to day, you don't think about that. I mean, if you have children and you're living in certain states, you might think about whether there might be a school shooting, right? Because those still happen with regularity. So I sometimes in Portugal, like I live near a ravine, and I walk down the ravine to get into town, and I'll come back as dark is falling, and I'll feel scared, and then I'll think, oh yeah, this is Portugal, I don't have to be scared. There's just, it's so much more peaceful, it's safe, people are friendly, it's very laid back. I do paddleboard, and I go to the beach, and I have a blow up board, I blow up the board, and on any day, any weekday, there are people playing volleyball and paddle boards, hitting a ball back and forth with a paddle on the beach, and there are kids. They come right from school. I mean, there's just such a focus on leisure and family. And I lived in Canada, and I found the same thing there. The American focus on achievement is so primary. And it's a violent country, and it's a stressful life, and this is like getting a massage every day, without getting a massage every day.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to spend a little bit of time in Portugal, only in sort of Porto and Lisbon and stuff. But it is a very warm and inclusive country, I think. And I think a big part of it is that obviously a huge part of the country is on the coast. So probably something like 90% of people live within 30 minutes of the water. And for me, I'm a real water person. I'm a Pisces astrologically. I'm just really feel nurtured and comforted by being around water, and I think that has a big difference. Something you said then about America very much being focused on achievement, and I said before we started, I've got a 19-year-old daughter, a 16-year-old son, and it's quite difficult sometimes to actually help them understand what success is, because I think our definition of success is very much, sadly, been around financial success, promotion, seniority, all this sort of thing. And I wonder how would you, because I'm getting free advice here, how would you define what success looks like or should feel like as we go through a very complicated next few years with AI and political divide and all those different things? What should success look and feel like, do you think?
I think the term that I would use is, what is your quality of life? And how much joy do you have on a regular basis? And how much closeness, how much love? How easy is it to be loving and to receive love? You know, I mean, I'm an artist, and expression is critically important for me to be happy. Like I always say, if I'm not creating something, I'm in a bad mood. So I'm always creating something. There is a piece of achievement in realizing who you are. If you have gifts and you never use them, you're going to be frustrated in your life. But I think, you know, there's so many books and movies about people who reach the pinnacle of financial success and prestige, and they get there and they say, why don't I feel better?
Yeah.
And because I think Portugal is country number 5, and the countries I've lived in, you know, the United States, Spain, Japan, Canada, and Portugal, they're quite different. Japan, very corporate culture. I lived in Tokyo, and the United States, very corporate culture. You know, Canada and Portugal and Spain are happier places to live. You know, there's more diversity, there's more acceptance, and I really feel like we have the wrong model for what a happy life is. I mean, success should be contentment, right? Not what other people think, not other people thinking that you're fantastic and you're brilliant, but a deep sense of peace within yourself.
It's interesting, they have a global happiness index, which is a fabulous report. I'd recommend everybody go and look for it after they listen to this. But the countries that tend to come the highest are always the Scandinavian and then Mediterranean countries. So it goes backwards and forwards between Finland, Sweden, Norway, Spain, Portugal, etc. UK, Japan, actually Canada's up there as well. UK, Japan, US. They're far, far lower than you would expect. When you think about it, I understand why they're not, but it tends to be the countries that are sort of slightly more social leaning, slightly higher taxation, slightly better public services, all those things that, you know, sort of coming together. Because for Finland, for goodness sake, it's dark half the year, so how happy are you going to be? It's still one of the happiest countries in the world because they have a very much a giving and a sharing mentality. And I think there's a lot to be said for that sort of slightly more communal way of thinking. Not saying, I'm not talking about socialism or communism, but that sort of slightly more communal way of being there to support your neighbor or your people in your town, your city, your country. I think there's something in there that we don't perhaps quite have right in the UK and the US and Japan that puts them down the list a little bit. Just coming onto I've gone completely off piste already, but just coming back to what I want to talk to you about. So you've written a lot, and you've written about embodied gender, embodied sexuality, and I wonder what perhaps the key moments or practices were that shifted you from thinking about identity to actually inhabiting it, if that makes sense.
This was my favorite question, so I'm so glad we're starting here. I think I will say that the watershed moment for me, the watershed point in my life, was when I went to Sarah Lawrence to study theater. And the reason for that is, if you have significant suffering, trauma, or tragedy in your life, especially early, you learn to armor your body to resist experience. So you carry a lot of muscular tension, and that muscular tension goes with dissociation, right? So you disconnect from your body. Maybe you're intellectual and you're living very much in your mind, in your head. And that armor, the longer you live with it, the more entrenched it becomes. And it's a physical armor. It's carried in tension. And it causes, it causes illness. It's bad for you in every way. It's carried stress, right? It's post-traumatic stress that's in the muscles. And I had a tremendous amount of that. And I had done, I'm a seeker, so I had done, I was like the cutting edge therapies. I just tried a lot of things. And I had always wanted to be an actor, so I had been a writer up until that point. And when I went to Sarah Lawrence, I did 30 hours a week for 2 years of breath work, yoga, movement, improvisation, dance, acting, where you're finding a way to have your emotions spontaneously, not to think, but to live in the moment. So a lot of training and being present. And it just cracked that armor. And it really felt like leaving a suit of armor. And that wasn't, that was when I started doing yoga. So, yoga came along with it. But, I eventually did insight meditation, 10-day silent meditation retreats. And that was like another step, and authentic movement was yet another step, and internal family systems. I kept learning more and more, but it was that practice of 30 hours a week of body. And I don't think, not everybody needs that much. I'm very lucky that I wanted to be an actor, and I was intuitively led to exactly what I needed to do to realize myself. But I do believe it's a practice. I don't think you get a moment where, one day I'm embodied, right? And the physical tension can come back. So, I did that for 2 years, and then I kept doing yoga, and I do, before I perform, or even before this, I did it to make sure that my body is in the, if we were using internal family systems, my body is available for big S self energy.
It's very interesting you say that, and I tend to get criticism when I say what I'm going to say now, but I sometimes struggle with therapy, so traditional therapy. And I've had traditional therapy for different things, and I always sort of left with a feeling that I was fine sort of to here, from the neck up, but then I always carry my tension, my pain, my whatever in my stomach, my gut. I can feel it as a mass. I can almost give a name to it, give a shape to it. I can really, really feel it. And I always thought there was something lacking when the sort of somatic sensation wasn't taken into account. And you verbalized it far better than I'm doing. But I think that there is a lot in terms of movement and understanding our body. And there's a really good book which a lot of people would have read. It's called "The Body Keeps the Score." That basically our body has a memory of things, and we sort of think our memory in our brain, our head, everything's fixed here with our head. That's it, fix that. But I do think there's a lot to be said for actually bringing the body into the discussion and physically moving, shaping. I guess is that what yoga and movement, is that what that's done for you?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you talk about this, because, and I feel like I put this on a social media, and I had a troll because I said, because I was talking about dating, and
Mm.
I ended up, when I left my marriage, I ended up dating primarily women. I'm pansexual, but women were what the gender that was available, who were lesbian or bisexual women. And and there's a big thing in the queer community of, have you done your work? I think in like relationship coaching, everybody have you done your work? And all of all, except for one, but all but this one woman had everybody been to therapy, everybody'd read self-help books, but they were older, so they'd done their therapy in the 90s, early 2000s, before somatic experiencing, before we started really understanding that talk therapy is extremely limited, and it
Mm.
doesn't change how you hold tension. It changes your insight, but that doesn't change behavior or your felt sense of life, which happens in the body. And I think there's what I was talking about creating a fluid sense of movement and relaxation. And there's also the ability to bring the mind and the body together, and to have the stamina to sit with whatever sensations or emotions arise in the body without a
Mm.
need to compulsively change them. And, the two things go together.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that whole piece where we get very much on our heads when we go to the self-help section of the latest bookshop that has shelves and shelves and shelves, it sort of indicates that somehow we're broken, need to be fixed. Whereas I think very much the exploring, understanding, and being present in your own body doesn't imply any of those things, which I think it feels a lot more. It feels a lot more positive as opposed to trying to fix a negative. If that makes sense.
Yeah, there's I think he was a medical doctor. His name was John Sarno, and he wrote this book called The Mind Body Prescription. And it
Mm-hmm.
was a lot about how we somatize feelings, in order not to feel them, we have physical pain. And there's such a connection between our mind and our body. And
Mm.
and his thing was, the way to cure the physical pain that is caused by a thing in, your brain saying, I don't want to feel this, I'm going to cause physical pain instead, I'm going to have a back problem, I'm going to have an ulcer.
Yeah.
um, the thing that you have to really work on telling yourself is, there is nothing wrong with me. And that was, I read his books because I had back pain, and then I cured my back pain. This is like 20 years ago. But using this method, but it seemed like a very profound thing. What if there's nothing wrong with me? And I really love that, because it dispenses with diagnosis, it dispenses with pathology, and it goes to some of what Gen Z is doing, which is reclaiming diagnoses and saying, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm neurodiverse, I'm different,
Mm.
right? Which is what, as part of the queer community, I love that, and it's very much what I do with it. Um, Being in pain is something that I want to soothe and help, but I don't want to call myself names for the way that I survived, you know?
100%. And I think all of that is sadly learned behavior, because we don't come into the world feeling at fault or wrong or whatever else. It's all learned behavior from whatever society has decided is the right way to be or think or behave or etc. Um, yeah, and I do think if we went back a couple of 100 years where we lived very different lives, we only knew people in our village and that was it. We didn't have this big comparison culture that we have now, where looking at your neighbours or, heaven forbid, social media, we have this view about how things should be. But we're trying to live up to a world or an example that actually doesn't exist. Because everybody's going to put the best version of themselves out there. Nobody's going to put the crappy day or the shitty day or anything on social media, are they? So you only ever comparing yourself to the very, very best and manufactured version of somebody else, which is, yeah, which can be very complicated, particularly for young people at the moment that are just bombarded with almost a fire hose of information, not knowledge, but information. Thankfully, you and I didn't have to cope with that as kids. It's just trying to imagine how children cope with that now. Just is it's pretty staggering, really.
And I'm so aware, because I'm on social media, because I'm promoting a book, and I'm seeing teenagers trying to be influencers. Like that's the goal, right? Everybody
It
wants to
is.
be an influencer, have 1 million followers, and get paid for doing that. And
Yeah,
it seems terribly sad, as a way to find worth.
it does, and I think the very nature of it encourages or takes you down a path of being more and more outspoken, more and more extreme, more and more diversive. Because if nobody wants to just watch somebody that's just a nice person, generally, they tend to very much focus on, the sort of darkest parts of people's psyche and people's mental health, and sort of tap into those and exploit them in a way that doesn't feel. And we were saying at the beginning about how things look in a historical context. I do wonder whether we'll look back in 20 years' time and sort of think that social media was like cigarettes, just something that, how on earth did we smoke, or how on earth did we go on social media? What were we thinking? Or letting our teenage kids go on social media. It's it feels like something we might live to regret a little bit in the future. Um, Again, just coming back to what I was supposed to talk about. So you left. Hopefully, you don't mind talking about this, but you left a 35-year sexless marriage in your 60s, and I wonder what finally made you decide that it was time to leave and was appropriate to leave after 35 years. A lot of people will think, well, 35 years, okay, whatever, and just carrying as we are. What was it that the sort of brought the camel's back, or was the final straw, or why did you manage to get away at that point?
I think, if you don't mind me giving some context and taking a little
No,
time.
please.
Yeah. So this is somebody that I had known since I was 23, and I left the marriage when I was 62. And I always say I married up. And what I mean by that is, I come from, a violent family. I come from a family that no one would want to come from. And I married into the social strata is a little different because my ex's parents were originally working class, but they invested well. Then they became middle class. My ex's siblings are upper middle class, but I married into a Jewish family where people loved each other. And I say this, my ex was nicer than anyone I'd ever dated. Their family, I'd never met a family like this. They were progressive. I liked their politics. And my ex's parents sent me a check on my birthday every year for, I don't even know how many years, 20. So, and my ex and I had, I always say our marriage was a people growing machine. So we communicated, we triggered each other, we made each other crazy, but we loved each other so much. And we worked through a lot of things, and our relationship kept getting better over those 35 years.
Hmm.
So I was never, it was sexual for the first couple of years and then not. And that was never my choice. I'm not asexual, my ex is. But we didn't have that language. And so, my ex we would go to, couples weekends, and we went to therapy, and nothing helped the sexual part of our relationship. And so there were a number of things that happened that allowed me to leave. And I always say leaving took everything I had. I thought I was going to grow old and die with this person. Now we have kind of reached a place, we're very close friends. I'm very glad I don't have to lose them. But the first thing that happened was that I made this web series called Assigned Female at Birth. And I interviewed 50 people for that web series. And I interviewed a lot of queer people. I interviewed a lot of young queer people. And I started interviewing people who talked about asexuality. And I had never heard that term. You know, the term that I heard was sexual anorexia. Asexuality is an identity. Sexual anorexia is there's something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
And when these young people started talking to me about being asexual or aromantic, I thought, oh, there is no hope. Like after 32 years of no sex, you would think I would have gotten that there was no hope. But I'm like,
Yeah.
it broke my denial. Like this is never going to happen in this marriage. And then my ex's parents both died. And, you know, I mean, I would expect my ex to have grief, but for 3 years they were completely shut down. And all the things I loved about our marriage, there was a lot less of them. And then we did this thing, I wrote about it in the book. It's like an inventory of your relationship, and you own what your part is about what didn't work, and you forgive each other. And, you know, it's supposed to be this like incredibly transformative moment in a relationship. We finished it, and you know, you do it with another couple. So the three of them were sitting; they were all happy, and I was looking out the window, thinking, "I'm done. How can I be done? I'm done. I'm out of room. I have no more room to keep growing with this person." And so that was what happened, and and then the last thing was I was in my own web series filming a scene with a lot of sexual chemistry. And I was exhausted. I was doing like 3 jobs and I couldn't turn on the way I needed to turn on. So I went in the bathroom and I did this yoga thing where I twisted open energetically my second chakra. I'm not this woo, but I was desperate to be good as an actor, so I was going to try anything. And I came out, the scene was electric, and then I couldn't shut it down. It's like I opened it up, and once I had opened up, once I wasn't repressing myself, I couldn't tolerate being in an asexual marriage anymore. So all those things happened within a couple years, and then, my ex walked into, we had separate bedrooms, and we didn't always sleep apart, but we had separate bedrooms, and they walked in, and I was crying, and I looked at them and I said, "Why am I crying?" And they said, "Because you're going to leave me." And I did. After 35 years and love, I think it's hard to leave super toxic, trauma bonded relationships. And
Yeah.
and our relationship, started out less healthy and got healthier. But so I'm not saying, it's easy to leave those, but it was the best love I'd ever known. So I had to have faith that maybe I could find something that was more congruent with who I'd become.
Was it scary to open yourself up intimately to a new person or people after such a long period of time?
Yes and no. So the yes was, am I going to be safe with this person? Are they a good person? Do they have any knowledge of how to be intimate and the skills that intimacy requires? Are they going to hurt me, right? Emotionally, are they going to hurt me? And then when it comes to sexuality, like I think I amuse myself this way. I'm the oldest of six children. I'm also a Pisces, by the way, and I was raising kids when I was a kid, and I have a German mother, so I'm like super organized and type A. So I was like, oh, well, if I'm going to be sexual after decades of not being sexual, I better do my own work. Like I better be ready. And then, I was talking to a therapist who told me about this new therapy called brain spotting. And she was like, I cured my body self-hatred in a day. And I was like, that sounds like the loaves and the fishes to me, but
Mm.
I'll try anything. And it is a great therapy, and I did that, and it actually removed the worst of my triggers. So I still and I mean, nobody after that long not being sexual is sane. You know, like you're hungry, you know, and your judgment is impaired. And I
Yeah.
knew that about myself. But the thing that I was not unclear about or vulnerable around were my sexual boundaries. Like I always say, you want to know how good my sexual boundaries are? I dated somebody 25 years younger, the sexiest person I've ever met in my life, absolutely gorgeous. And I said no because I thought that it was not the experience that I wanted to have. And that, wasn't an easy no. But like we talk about our bodies, my body was at dead no. Like, this is not a safe person. It was the first person I dated. I don't want this to be how I start off. So that, and I think some of my trepidation and my fears actually were correct, right? I was not prepared for dating. I had no idea. I mean, people have game, when you date, people have
Apparently,
game.
I've heard about it. Yeah.
I mean, there's love bombers and there's, gaslighters, and those things, they're not uncommon, you know? And dating, you have to learn how to date and how to very quickly weed out people who are, um, flattering you, praising you, from people who are genuinely interested in who you are.
Mm. And do you find it easy is probably the wrong word? So are you comfortable talking about consent and boundaries and vulnerability when you engage with new partners?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I got better at it, but I came into dating after running
Hmm.
this web series, and I've been using consent in professionally for decades. So, in theater, there is if there's a sex scene, a kiss scene, a love scene, anything with touch, and I direct theater and film, then there are protocols for consent professionally. In a classroom setting, you can do a contract with your class where they get to participate in building the container in which the learning has happened. I did that for 35 years. And so, and I had just been using consent culture creatively on set in a
Mm.
film. So I came into dating from that familiarity.
Hmm.
And so I had a talk, right? It was like a talk that I kind of planned with myself about what are the things that I am going to address before before anything sexual happens. So, of course, STDs, consent, um, and it was interesting because people don't know what consent is, and they don't know that, like, consent isn't can I kiss you and that means you can do everything else, right? It's I mean, it's asking for consent and having that dialogue is excellent. I think that's a really sexy dialogue. It's a really
Mm.
intimate dialogue. It's a really meaningful dialogue. And when you don't have that, you don't have as a profound connecting experience. So I I learned that I had to get much more explicit about consent because people thought they knew what it was and they didn't.
It's very interesting. I've been fortunate to talk to a lot of people in what some might define as the kink community or the BDSM community, or different communities that perhaps are more open with their sexuality. And one of the things that has always struck me is how much more of a conversation takes place, and how much more discussion. And like you said, there's a lot of eroticism in actually talking about what you're going to do or want to do or think about doing. Whereas I think sometimes in a more societally traditional relationship dynamic, we just don't talk about it. we just do something, and that we almost have a checklist really. And I talked to somebody recently, and they were saying something about consent, which I think is something that you just touched upon. Is that, and she was saying that she consented to this particular thing with her husband, but actually the sort of, we said, but just because I consented to it then doesn't mean it's on the table every time we're intimate. It's not something I want to do all the time. It's almost that, well, we did it last Thursday. It's almost that, well, you've consented, that's it now. You can't unconsent. But you're sort of saying it's consent is much more of a fluid concept than an absolute.
There's, I mean, I learned this at the very end of my marriage. We did try polyamory. It was an epic fail. I mean, we were in the middle of the pandemic, but we together, my ex and I, attended workshops, where people were talking, and we met some people, and that I love them. I think they're the most honest people I've ever known, and they talk about consent. There's like consent for one thing, right? Can I hold your hand? That's
Mm-hmm.
one thing. And then there's we're doing a weekend workshop, and for the duration of the weekend, whenever you want to hug me, it's okay. So that's a consent over a duration of a period of time. And unless somebody specifically says every time we're intimate we can do this, they haven't given you consent. And there is assumed consent, but if you're actually consciously working with consent, you need to ask every time. And I think in some ways, I did have one person that I dated who was very good at consent, and then started doing things without asking. I'm like, we asked each other everything, and now it was almost a bigger betrayal to
Yeah.
suddenly, where'd the consent go? I think, I mean, I know actually you're talking about Scandinavia. I know there are classes on intimacy and consent in
Mm.
Scandinavia. I wish that we had those in every school in the world so that you learned as you were growing up. Everybody wants to be respectful, but what does respect mean? Well, it means respecting other people's agency, their rights, asking for consent. How do you do that? How do you practice respect?
And in the work that you do as a solo performer and memorist, I think we naturally look to our own experiences. So you mine your own erotic and emotional history for material, and I wonder, how do you navigate that? So you, yes, you are exposing yourself, and that can be liberating. But how do you avoid exposing yourself to an uncomfortable degree when it's something that actually I really didn't want to share this? Are you very good at sort of drawing those lines?
Yes. Uh, so I think the best way to talk about this is from a plural perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So and there's always the body as reference. What does my gut say, right? My gut
Yeah.
is my intuition. It's located in my body. But if my body feels anxious or kind of shaky about anything, I try not to
Mm.
ever do it. And I I mean I am first of all, I'm an incredibly highly trained artist. And since
Mm.
I'm such a rule breaker, I'm not sure that I love saying that, but I am. I have 2 degrees in, I have one in English, which was really creative writing, and then I have a theater degree. And when you train, especially the creative writing degree, you're taught about self indulgence and you're taught about the difference between helping an audience or a reader to have an experience and dumping your experience on them. So that's like
Mm.
that's like good writing 101. So I was trained very rigorously with that, how to create an experience for the reader that also expresses my reality. And then I have my own guide of how does my body feel and how do my parts, like, are my parts talking to me, right? Are they
Mhm.
screaming and saying no, 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 no? And if they and if they are, I've got to soothe them and find out what's going on. And I find in general that I pretty much always have the same boundaries, whether it's about something that's traumatic that I'm writing about or whether it's sexual. I don't do graphic detail. And so that's a big part of the boundaries. And so I'm presenting experience so that people can feel it emotionally. I'm not doing anything that's prurient or sensational. So I know what those things are and I don't do them. And then I was really, not surprisingly, in love with Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton when I was in my 20s. And there was some people, they were the confessional poets, right?
Mhm.
And some people talked about their work as if it was embarrassing. And other people wrote and said, these two women have made themselves into icons and metaphors for the female experience. So I feel like I'm non-binary, I'm not female, but I do feel like the way I approach content needs to have a through line to the universal so that I'm not just saying this happened to me, feel bad for me. I'm saying here's what happened and here's what I understand about humanity and life and thought from what happened to me. And there's a very big difference. I'm publishing a memoir. I'm not publishing a diary. And yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and I'm a literary writer. I mean, I use the myth of Orpheus in my memoir. I call myself Orpheus. I don't ever use my own name. So artistic distance allows people to get close to you. If you remove the distance, it's therapy and it pushes people away.
Mm. And what, and this might be the wrong word, but what responsibilities, if any, do you feel as a queer, non-binary storyteller when you're depicting sex and consent and psychological complexity? So a lot of audiences, it might be the first time they've encountered it, or the first time they've seen it discussed so honestly. Do you feel a responsibility, duty of care? Where does that land within you?
I would say that I do feel a responsibility for how I represent. Um, and, it's in entertainment. I'm a public person, even though I'm a super private person. And,
Mm.
and I don't want to ever represent for my own people, for the queer community, from an unprocessed place of hurt or anger. So I'm fine with expressing hurt and anger, but I want to have an ability to hold those things with consciousness. So, I mean, one of the things uh, that I have been critical of is the privilege in upper middle class white cisgender lesbian communities, right? That it's part of the queer community. It's not my non-binary trans community, but I've
Mm.
been critical, and in my memoir I write about experiences of transphobia with upper middle class white lesbians, and and I want to show, and I also show some of those people worked so hard to try to get my pronouns right and tried to be respectful. So I have to, if I'm going to write that critically, I have to show the whole picture. I feel like, as a queer person or just as a human being, I don't want anything I do to engender hate or prejudice. Certainly not against my own community, but not against any other community either.
So, something you've written about that touched on something I'm always curious about. So you've written about becoming, in your words, the love of my life. So without giving up on wanting connection, but being very focused on self-intimacy, self-love, and yeah, being very aware of what you mean to yourself. And I wonder, first of all, have you always loved yourself in such a way? And if not, how did that come about? And what does self-intimacy look like for you? That's a big question. So,
Yeah, no,
so
I mean, it'll have a long answer. When I was a child, there was a battle inside of me between self-hatred and self-love. If you have no self-love and self-care, why would you continue to live, right? You wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, you'd need to check out. It would be unbearable. So I think even people who are very insecure, have shame and self-hatred, they've got some part of them that cares about themselves. Um, and I had a battle in part because I wasn't treated very well, So I was being taught that I was not valuable, and I have no idea why it was that I was able to always find something to hold on to that I thought I was. And there are kind of remarkable moments early in my life. I mean, the most remarkable is when the nuns at my high school took me to live at the convent because they didn't like how I was being treated at home. And that didn't happen, out of nowhere. It happened because I promoted myself to the college level classes. I made honors. I showed that I wanted to change my life, and then they really wanted to help that, right? So early on, there was, I had self destructive behaviors, I had self affirming behaviors, and there was a kind of polarization. Um, I think that if I put this in a Jungian kind of framework, I would say you can't love yourself until you love your shadow. You can't love yourself
oh,
until
okay.
you can't love yourself until you love your pain, right? And the parts of you that carry that pain. So there was a point in my life, and I was just discovering that I was plural, and um, I was 30, 31, 32 years old, and I started, a process of inside myself reaching to, my inner kids and the ones who were in the most pain, and offering to have them give me that experience so I would feel it in my body and I could let it go. This is like, it's standard unburdening IFS, but I was doing
Mm.
it without Dick Schwartz or any knowledge of what he was doing. And And I started, instead of, my attitude, I think, I am an American, right? Push down what hurts and forge ahead. you know, um, when I married my ex, I had friends who said, "Oh God, this is the marriage of the unstoppable force and the immovable object." I was the unstoppable force, of course, and then I started listening to the parts of me that were scared, and that forging ahead was just a way to cover up the fear. What happens if I listen? What happens if I care? And that it's reciprocal, right? Because then
Mm.
the the parts of you that hate you are taught to hate you, right? That's what I'm saying about childhood. That
Yeah.
you're taught shame. You're taught that you're not of value. You're taught you matter less than whatever else matters in the family life. And the reciprocity is, if I reach out to the parts of me that carry that shame, that carry that pain, and I really help them, not only is that me loving them, they're going to love me back, right? They're going to have a higher opinion of me for taking care of them. So it's a reciprocal relationship that multiplies exponentially into an experience of self-care and self-love. And the more you do it, it's kind of like mushroom growth. You just can't tell where it's going to go or how it's going to change you. And I think, like, I'm going to tell a story tonight. I have two stories prepared. One of them is much more vulnerable and scarier to tell. And I consult with my body and with all of me about, is it too scary to tell? Because I don't have to do the scariest thing. Is the other one too safe? Like, I
Mm.
get to weigh this about my decisions in my life, and it's changed the way that I live. It's changed it a lot. Um, I mean, I don't even know how to talk about, like, when I go paddleboarding as much as I can, and this experience, I call it liftoff, like this remarkable joy, and that I experience across all levels of who I am, and this connection to the earth, to every living being. You know, I think that that is where self love takes you. It doesn't take you into narcissism. It takes you into a sense of connection that is Catholic, not in the religious sense of the word, but in the sense of being very broad.
I love that you said that, because I find a lot of people will talk about nature as if it's somehow removed from them. It's like there's us and there's nature, as opposed to thinking about, as you said, that in a sort of the Catholic in the meaning of the words, or universal. It's that we are all part of one. If we weren't here, nature would be very happy without people being around, much happier. But I think once you start to accept that actually we're all part of something, whether it's the trees, the creatures, the water, whatever, we're all part of it. That we're not distinct and separate from it. I think that's perhaps one of the frailties that humanity has, is that we somehow need to feel that we're on a pedestal and we're above everything else, as opposed to what would be far more genuine would to be hopeful that we're part of everything. Does
No,
that probably sounds a bit woo now, but does
no,
that make sense?
it's what I believe, and I actually think it's science, right?
Yeah,
That
it is.
we are mammals, we are
Yeah,
animals, we are nature ourselves. We're nature, of course. We're
yeah.
part of nature, you know. And um, I I'm thinking of Oprah for some reason, because I think this is who I heard say it, that we are made of the same thing the stars are made of. We're all made of the same things.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to a talk recently. There's a scientist in the UK called Brian Cox, and he's just launching a new show, and it's all about sort of stars and galaxies, and it's on one hand it was amazing. On the other hand, it's just hard to comprehend that there were 2 trillion galaxies of 800 billion stars within each. It just makes you feel so so small and insignificant. But he was saying all of the atoms that have ever existed are still they're still with us today. We're all part of the atoms that existed just after if you believe in it, just after the Big Bang. That's it. We're just all energy, and at the moment, your energy is in your form. My energy is in my form. My dog's energy is in her form. The tree's energy is in their form. But ultimately, we'll all go back to being energy again, and we'll reconfigure in a different form. It's just that we just happen to be in this physical shape. Our atoms have decided to form this shape. But if you think of everything as just being energy, and everything that's out there is just the atoms that were there right from the very, very beginning, it does make you absolutely think scientifically, morally, spiritually, whatever, that actually we're all just part of whatever life is. We're just part of life, really. Whether we play a small part, an insignificant part, an amazing part, whatever, we're just all part of that whole, gamut of existence. Of course, we're getting very esoteric now, but it's fascinating. It just upsets me when people have this. Yeah, I guess it's part of politics. I guess that you have to you have to believe that there's better, that something is or somebody is better than somebody else or something else, and if we could somehow extract the word better and the word should and lots of those sort of words, I think we would be in a lot better place, really. Um,
It's what I believe. I think that hierarchy is our problem, and
it is.
hierarchy creates this sort of false certainty. Whereas if you think of we're a network or we're a constellation, and we're all connected on the same plane, we treat each other a lot differently.
We would. Do you think there are things that you can access or believe possible now you're a little older than you were than when we were very young? Are the things that as you know, as you and I get older, everybody's getting older, I guess, but as we sort of come to this part of our life, sort of, middle age, late middle age, whatever you want to call it, are the things we can access now that we perhaps couldn't when we were younger? And if so, why do you think that is?
I definitely think there are things that you can access as you get older that you can't when you're younger. And some of that is a kind of unburying of the true core of who you are. We have longer lifespans than we used to, and
Mm,
there's an opportunity in that to do self-discovery. When you're working the farm and you die at 30, you're not going to do this stuff. Um, my own lived experience is that my ideas when I was younger were shaped by my conditioning in ways I didn't even know. And I have always I'm queer, I'm a nonconformist, I'm an artist, I am to some extent an intellectual. It wasn't that I didn't think about things, it's that I couldn't see myself the way that I can see myself now. And the better you see yourself, the better you also see other people. So, um, that's an opportunity for depth. It's an opportunity for wisdom. It's an opportunity for kindness and for humility, right? You start to
mm.
know that the whole time that you were living thinking you knew everything, you didn't really know everything. That means you probably don't know everything now either. And that's wisdom. I mean, it's different in different parts of life because I'm very athletic. Like, I'm aware the days when I could possibly have considered surfing the big waves without dying, those days are gone. There are things physically as you get older, not as much as people think, but there are things that it would be very unwise to do. And I think as you get older, sort of spiritually, psychologically, you have had many years to develop, and there's access and reach to a greater amount of development and a greater amount of kindness. I say this, there's a lot of agency in it. If you reach late middle age and you have sort of lived the same loop of experience, right? I mean, I dated people who have had, 22-year relationships. And that's a very extreme, or one long relationship and then a lot of short ones, and or 3 or 4 marriages, and they keep doing those same things again. They don't have a lot of flexibility in how they see things. They see things the way they have seen them through each one of those experiences, and they're trapped, right? So, age offers the possibility of layers of knowledge and experience and wisdom. Age also offers the possibility of calcification and much more difficulty in flexibility and growth.
Mm. That's a really interesting answer, and I do think that we're going to have to forge some sort of change within how society deals with aging and older people. Because exactly as you said, it wasn't long ago, the turn of the last century, so 1900s, the average lifespan of the UK was 45, sort of 48 in the UK. Now it's sort of 75, 78, whatever, and older. So I think the retirement age then was brought in of sort of 65 as being a notional retirement age was pretty valid at the time, because nobody reached that age. So no pensions to pay out. Whereas now people are living. My next door neighbor is Kathy's an artist. She's 86, still paints every day and sculpts every day, whatever. Her husband John is 80. He still draws every day, just puzzles every day, and is incredibly active. And so they've notionally sort of retired for the last sort of 20 years, whatever. So that wisdom and knowledge that we've sort of built up over our lives, it's almost once we turn 65 or 60 or whatever the retirement age is, it's sort of dispensed with. And there's nowhere to put it, which is very odd, because when you think about back to the US, think about the two houses, think about the presidency, think about the Supreme Court, that people there and the Supreme Court doesn't, you just stay on until you die. You can be 100, for goodness sake. Or presidency, we've got a president now in his 80s. The last president was in his 80s. A lot of people in the Senate, in Congress, are in their sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. So on one hand, it's fine for the people that supposedly decide what happens in the world to be much, much older. But for the rest of us, we get to a certain age, and there is definitely ageism across lots of assets and facets of life, rather. And it just seems to be that we're somehow going to have to change how we retain access, bring this wisdom and knowledge into the world, and don't just ignore it. We look at somebody in the street, they're walking past, they're perhaps walking a little bit slowly, they're in a supermarket counting out the change, and we get very frustrated with them, and I think, my goodness, no idea what that person did, what that person does, who that person is. We do seem to still have a sort of ageist view of the world. I'm not sure there's a question in there. It's just a very long diatribe of something that really bugs me. But do you know what I mean? Like I said, we spend all this time creating this incredible wisdom, working with incredible teams of people, being incredibly creative, doing all these amazing things. And then there's a sort of notional cutoff with, right, thank you. You sort of serve your useful purpose now. And it just, it doesn't feel like the right way to be, really.
There's a theater in Toronto, Canada called Buddies in Bad Times, and I know about it because I taught some LGBTQ writing workshops, and people from that theater took the writing workshops, and they had a theater project where they paired up somebody in their late teens, early 20s with people 60 and older to share stories and then create a theater project that was a multi-generational theater project. And I bring this up because I think that, when you get older, what you lose is stamina, right? I
Yes.
mean, you can't. My ex just retired, and I'm sure that they were lucky that they got to retire early. But they could have worked for 5 or 10 years, but they were sleeping more, right? Come home from work and sleep. You're tired. Your
Mhm.
body isn't up to putting in the same amount of hours. And there are, I'm thinking of, we have some incredible people showing up in politics in the United States. Mayor Mamdani in New York,
Yeah.
also AOC from New York,
Hmm.
Jasmine Crockett from Texas. There's a woman, she's South Asian. She's a trans activist and she's in Congress. And and I think, I don't know that having, you know, older people in government is so great. I think that it would be great to have a mix of generations. And it would also be really great to have mentorships and partnerships, like building, that constellation on the same plane where we say at different parts of life, you have different things to offer. I don't have the same stamina that I did when I was 20, but I have ideas that I didn't have then. And And young people often have new ideas, but they hold them the way young people hold them, which is tends to be black and white and very rigid. So you can, like, if you had a dialogue, wouldn't everything be better? That would be the way. Instead of, I mean, my ex is so is my father-in-law. He lived to 101. He was driving at 100, but they spent, a lot of time at home, right? They didn't go to assisted living until the last couple months of my father-in-law's life, and um, so they were living at home and they were watching television. That's not a quality of life, right?
Mm.
You're describing artists who are still making art in their 80s. That's very different
Mm.
than watching MSNBC 10 hours
Yes. Or heaven forbid, Fox.
a day.
Yes. It's something we've seen a little bit of in Europe, and I haven't necessarily seen it in the US, but I don't know as much about it. But we've had experiments here which generally proved to be successful, where they've intentionally brought generations together. So my son's school, when he was in prep school, so this would have been between when he was sort of, what would he be, 7 and 11. They had a program where they would go to the local old people's home, care home, whatever. So 1 hour on a Wednesday, 1 hour on a Friday, 1 hour on a Monday, whatever, and just interact with the people that live there. Do some art together. And arts are great for bringing people together, because the art you do when you're sort of 7 actually is the art that they pretended to do in the thing. And all of the people that worked in the care home and all the residents in the care home, all the students, they sort of say, "Gosh, it's the 1 hour a day that they look forward to so much. Just getting to spend that hour. They want to be with them all the time. Don't get me wrong, but actually, just having this energy whirling around, and these sort of kids were, yeah, incredibly open and connected, and wanted to be friends with these people. And they had a yes, then these people would come to the sort of kids' sports day, and almost became like a sort of pseudo grandparents in a way. But I think we've seen quite a bit of that. Where, and actually, I think in Sweden they've actually built quite a few nurseries, creches in the grounds of care homes and things. So they're bringing, intentionally making generations come together, because they wouldn't normally. And they just said, yeah, just it almost is. Some of the quotes maybe a bit much, but it's sort of said, like, gosh, it's brought us spark back into their lives again. They're excited again. They sort of hear laughter. We don't normally hear laughter, or yeah, it just felt like a very good thing to see, was sort of bringing generations together and recognizing actually there are so many things that we have that are similar that we can enjoy together. It doesn't need to be this big divide between us that the sort of the actual numbers might project as being. So you've been very generous with your time, so I'll just keep talking. And just two more, if that's okay with you. So, well, actually, three more. The first one must be, what was it that compelled you or made you feel it was the right time to document and share your memoir? Because by its very nature, it's very personal, and it's very emotional, and it's very giving of you to sort of share your story with the world. What was it that made you feel it was the right time to do that?
It's an interesting question because I uh, I wrote a memoir in 2006,
Hmm.
and it was also in a time in my life where there was upheaval, and I was changing my ideas about myself. And that memoir, I used to go to this place at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. They have a center. It's called the William Joyner Center for the Study of War and Social Consequences. And I used to go every summer to their writers' workshop. And when I wrote, and I wrote fiction, I wrote poetry, I had colleagues and mentors there, and then I brought this memoir that I had written, and the woman that looked at it really loved it, and so she shared it
Hmm.
with people, and they got it in front of an editor at Knopf, which is one of the big publishing houses. And when they got it in front of this editor, I spent like the next 10 days praying he would reject it. Like, just please reject it. Please. I am not ready to have anybody in the world be able to walk into a bookstore and read about my life. I'm not ready. I didn't realize it till we got to that point. He rejected it. Great. Um, yeah, it was a big, and that was a, yeah, we this kind of circles back to what we were talking about success, right?
Mm.
I come from a family. It's so Americana. It's so embarrassing. My father played football for Notre Dame and was president of his class, and my mother was the homecoming queen. They were a nightmare, but I like, only rich and famous will do if you come from that, right? And so I had that kind of drilled into me. And when I decided that me not being ready to publish this memoir was more important than the fact that it was headed apparently towards success, that changed how I treated myself, how I thought about myself. So, but I did know that the memoir was really good. you know, I mean, obviously, I got feedback that it was good, but I knew that it was one of the best things I'd ever done, and that was painful. Like, nobody's going to see this, and it's one of the best things I've done. So,
Mm.
the year that I'm writing about in this memoir was also a year of upheaval because I left my
Hmm.
marriage, and then I had two deaths. And then my landlord sold my building and everybody had to move out. And that all happened very, very quickly. And then I'm dating for the first time. And, I mean, I had experiences that were shock. I am so shocked by that year of dating. Like, I never thought I would date some of the people I dated. Um, I never thought I would give people the benefit of the doubt the way that, I mean, it was a shock. So I wanted to, at the end of that year, I was like, what just happened to me? What happened to, I don't understand. I'm completely overwhelmed. I need to understand what happened to me. So I started writing the memoir. And then, um, I thought, it was just a blah of experience, the first draft. And then I
Mm.
thought, well, if I really want to understand what happened to me, I need to write this in all of my voices, right? I need to include my inner dialogue. And then I went back to that first memoir and I took some of the sections and I brought it forward and I made the memoir. It's about the dating journey. That's the arc, is this, Orpheus is searching for Eurydice.
Hmm.
But what it is substantially is, how do we relate to ourselves and how do we love ourselves. And that was a message I think I really needed to put into the world. Like, I have the ability to be in touch with and hear the parts of my mind with a great deal of clarity that a lot of other people don't have. So if you could borrow my clarity, what would you understand about yourself? And this is a way that I can lend it to you, is by sharing the book. So it was, first I have to figure out, I had to discover what happened, and then I had to put it in my own lexicon, and then I have to, and then I was like, I really believe that the right people will understand more about themselves by identifying with me. And, for the wrong people, it's just not their book.
That's a good answer. For just for people that perhaps are listening that there might be many of them that are staying in relationships or feel that they're stuck in the identity that they present to the world, that might feel like slow self erasure that's just not becoming of who they want to be. What would you suggest is one gentle step they could take to perhaps be who they want to be?
I saw this question. I was hoping we would get to it, because I think that when you are in a relationship and you have inner conflict about whether it's good for you or not, right? Is this the life I want to lead? Is this the person I want to be? Because relationships profoundly affect us, all of them do. And what happens is you get into this push pull with yourself, and the stay or go argument has no beginning and no end, and you're just struggling. And that keeps you stuck. That argument keeps you stuck. It makes you incapable of choosing one thing or the other. So I think the most profound thing that you can do is to put both feet in to the relationship. So even though you have these doubts, it's to say, for the next 6 months, I am going to be all in. When I have the doubts, I'm going to say, we can consider that in 6 months, and I'm going to be committed for 6 months, or for 2 months, or however long. And
Mm-hmm.
when you do that, you surrender to what the experience of being in the relationship actually is. And either it transforms, or you say, oh, I really can't do this, which is, I think, what happened to me. I reached, like, that inventory we did, when I, at the end of it, when I said I'm done, like, I didn't say that, but I felt it. That was my moment of, I have surrendered to my best efforts, my ex's best efforts, and it's not enough for me. And I don't want that to be true, but it's not enough for me. But I can only arrive at it's not enough for me if I close all the exits in my own mind and be with what is. Very Buddhist. Because I don't think that I don't think that it's a lot of people would say, well, you can go to therapy, or you can get empowered, or you can try all these different things to change yourself. But I think it's more of I'm going to quit fighting. And the first way to
Yeah.
quit fighting is to actually try. I gave a friend of mine this advice, and she, at first, she was like, "You're insane. You know that? You're insane." And then she did it, and the person that she was dating really changed. Like, the person she was dating was kind of avoidant and non-committal, and the person turned around and said, "Okay, I'm ready to commit," because I think that person could feel my friend's energy shift to being there. But then
Yeah.
once my friend had that, she was like, "Oh, I don't want it," and then she was able to leave.
And then my final question, and I don't know whether you're a planner or know what's going to happen, but I wonder what do you think the future holds for you? What do you hope the future holds for you?
I'm pausing because there's a way in which the future is an unknown. So I've been out of my marriage for 4 years,
Mhm.
and that when I was dating a lot right after the marriage, I was dysregulated by all the grief, and now I'm not. Right, I'm pretty centered, and I am living in Portugal, and I am profoundly out of the closet, and I have this storytelling thing, and in the United States, I was always running things. I was always leading things, and I'm not doing that now. So there's a big unknown, but with all the pressure and the stress and the peace of this country, I think I will be more myself than I've ever been, and that means quieter and happier. And when I perform and when I write, I do it from a place of sharing, not a place of driving ambition. So there's a way in which, how can I know what it's, I'm in the middle of this transformation. I don't know what it'll look like. I just know that I like my days, you know?
I would all be very happy if we could say that. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and being so open about sharing your lived experience. It's been fascinating. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.